My brother turned my life into a nightmare. He fathered a child with my wife, and it turned out that our son was not mine. After our parents disowned him and left me the entire $2 million inheritance, he came crawling back to me. I have a younger brother, Caleb, who has hated me all his life. If you think it's because of jealousy, you are mistaken. I was not the beloved child. He was, so he had no reason for envy. My mother always spoiled the younger brother. He was the golden child in our family. She cooked his meals, washed his clothes, while I had to do everything myself. She even asked me to help him with his studies. I had to help him just because he was a family member, but I never received the same treatment. I resigned myself to this as I was quite independent. Perhaps it was also my fault that I catered to his desires, asking for nothing in return. My brother never helped me when I needed it, and only turned to me when he needed something. I was a quiet, introverted child who loved to study and do my own things, while he was an exact copy of our father, rough and noisy. I also got used to speaking directly and honestly, not embellishing. Perhaps that's why my mother had a negative opinion of me from childhood. In the end, he was the darling of our entire family. I didn't care until we grew up. Problems started when he found ways to torment and mock me for being different from him. He teased me about my height or because I wore glasses. He would sneak into my room to read my personal diary and complain to Mom about what I wrote there. I yelled at him and complained to our parents about him violating my personal boundaries, but they laughed it off, saying it was not a problem. My brother did worse things, like almost breaking my glasses or tampering with my food. Once, he put rocks in my porridge, but luckily, I saw them before they could damage my teeth. I told Mom, but she dismissed it, saying that's how brothers bond. Whenever we argued, Caleb would intentionally press all my complexes. We studied at the same school, and he knew that several classmates bullied me. He sided with those guys instead of me, calling me names like freak, loser, or hairy monkey, and even inciting physical harm because, in his words, I was just a worthless loser. Another time, we argued. I don't remember why, probably over some nonsense. In the end, he told me he wished I were dead. Other insults I easily ignored, but this hurt because at that time, I was struggling with mental health issues. Now I am better, but it was awful to hear that my own brother wished me dead. Dad was often at work, and Mom apparently didn't care. Once, she even yelled at me, claiming it was my fault for playing with him and annoying him. The situation worsened once when we were in upper grades. He tried to set my hair on fire. The most shocking thing was that Mom took his side, claiming he was just playing. Who plays like that? Seriously? Luckily, Dad eventually sided with me and pointed out that they had serious problems with Mom. He threatened to call the police on Caleb. It was a sobering thought. I never thought he would take my side, because he always talked about how similar he and Caleb were as he grew up. But Dad told me he had endured for years, hoping Caleb was just an unreasonable child. But he gradually began to realize that Caleb was becoming a real tyrant. When I heard this from Dad, I felt such relief that I almost cried. I confessed to my father everything Caleb had done to me over the years, and even told him about the bullying at school. Dad was shocked at what I had been through. The next day, he approached the school and spoke to the principal to warn my tormentors of serious consequences if they continued. That evening, Dad signed me up for MMA classes at a local gym. He said I needed to get stronger and learn to stand up to the bullies in my life. I admit, for a geek like me, learning to fight probably looked funny. However, as with everything in life, I approached it with full concentration. I set aside time for training to attend classes and train every day. I don't want to brag, but it completely changed my life and my physical form. One day, Caleb was at it again. He stole the pocket money we received for helping around the house, which I had been saving for a long time. Caleb sneaked into my room and took the money. I caught him as he was about to leave with friends on a bicycle. I firmly told him to return my money because he knew stealing was wrong, but Caleb just smirked and said all I was capable of was complaining to Dad. I don't know what came over me, but I punched Caleb in the face. He fell to the ground, then I threw him down again. Caleb started crying loudly like a little child. It was funny to see a teenager crying on the ground. However, Mom ran out of the house, hearing her baby's cry, to help him and find out what happened. When she learned that I had fought with him, she was surprised and then started scolding me. She said that as the older brother, I should be teaching Caleb good things, and Caleb seemed to enjoy that I was being scolded. Mom also complained to Dad that I had beaten Caleb and that I needed to be controlled more seriously. Dad asked us both to explain ourselves. I told how Caleb had stolen the money I had honestly earned and saved, and Caleb tried to justify it by saying he needed the money for a date and that I, as his brother, should have helped him. However, Dad told Caleb that he was lucky I just hit him for the theft because someone else might have called the police. Dad continued to tell Caleb that he had no right to take other people's things without permission. Caleb didn't like this and began to throw a tantrum, probably hoping that Mom would support him. But Dad was firm. When Caleb realized that I wouldn't be punished for hitting him, he yelled how much he hated me, ran to his room, and locked the door. After this incident, Caleb began to keep his distance from me. He finally understood that he could no longer bully me, and even Dad didn't support his antics. For the first time in a long time, I felt that we were equal. Although he could no longer physically harm me, he tried to hurt me with words when he knew our parents were not around. As each year passed, it seemed that he became only angrier and more volatile. If I approached him with a question, he simply ignored me and left the room, whispering after me that I was a nerd and a loser. If he wanted to say something to me, he did it only through Mom, who relayed his messages. I asked Mom why Caleb couldn't just talk to me directly if he needed something, and she asked me to be more understanding. I didn't know if it was just adolescence, and I needed to wait, or if he really hated me. I used to be able to cope with what he said, but at some point, I just wanted to move out to get rid of this poison. I repeatedly approached Mom, asking her to organize a conversation so we could discuss everything, but she always refused, saying she didn't want to interfere. I even asked her opinion on why he treated me this way, but she just shrugged off the question. Eventually, I moved away to university, which I had dreamed of attending since I was an excellent student and even received a scholarship. Dad threw a party in my honor, and Mom seemed proud of me too. However, Caleb remained distant. Excitement about the future and relief from escaping the toxic atmosphere at home marked the first few months at university as liberating. I made many friends, enjoyed classes, and began building a life without the oppressive atmosphere of home. The fear of verbal attacks from Caleb disappeared, and I experienced a new sense of peace for the first time. In my sophomore year, I started dating my future wife, Karen. We were introduced by a friend at a fraternity party, and we hit it off immediately. As I came from a religious family, having children out of wedlock was strictly unacceptable. Therefore, when we found out in our senior year that Karen was pregnant, it prompted us to get married immediately after graduation. Our wedding was small, but with a beautiful ceremony. Our parents were happy for us, and we had a great time. At that time, I considered Karen to be the love of my life. I always held the belief that I wanted monogamy, one woman with whom I would live my entire life. Despite other women showing interest in me over the years, I never looked elsewhere because I was genuinely content with my marriage. Karen was perfect for me, and I never wanted to hurt her. However, over the years of our marriage, I twice discovered that she had cheated on me, One of the instances was with a married colleague at work with whom she had an on-again, off-again affair that lasted several years, and the other was with a former boyfriend from school when she went to visit her family in another state. I'm sure some might call me a fool, and looking back, I can't deny that. After periods of separation in both situations, I decided to forgive my wife. I didn't want to raise a child in a broken home and truly believed we could overcome these trials. We were young enough when the situation with her colleague occurred, so I chalked it up to youthful mistakes and impulsive actions. For a while, everything seemed normal. I could no longer fully trust her, but I tried my best to push doubts to the back of my mind because I knew that if I chose forgiveness, I needed to move forward and start with a clean slate. For years had passed since her second affair, and I felt I had made the right decision in giving her a chance to show that she still wanted to be in our marriage. Over many years, Karen seemed to have changed, and we were genuinely happy, planning the future of our family. However, 3 months ago, my reality was shattered by another incident, which I believed was far worse than the previous ones. She confessed that she had been sleeping with another man for a long time and hinted that our son might not even be mine. Hearing these words, I felt as if the ground was slipping away from me. A mix of shock, betrayal, and bewilderment overwhelmed me. In a daze, I asked her why she had hidden such an important secret and how she could do something so destructive. Her response was cold and indifferent. She seemed detached, almost uncaring about the pain she caused. Her answers were vague, leaving me with more questions than answers. I insisted that Karen tell me the truth because I believed I deserved to know who the father of my child was. After all, I had been raising our son from the beginning. Eventually, she confessed that it was Caleb. My eyes widened in shock, and I asked her what exactly she meant. That's when Karen told me that she and Caleb became friends after I introduced her to my family, and she stayed with us from Thanksgiving to New Year's. I remember that Caleb, usually cold to me, was very polite and friendly with her. I was happy about this because I didn't want Karen to feel unwelcome. She wanted to be accepted into my family, so she often spent time with my mom. She noticed that Caleb and I were not very close and asked me about it. I finally opened up to her and told her that my brother and I would probably never be able to mend our relationship. Karen understood this and began including Caleb in our plans, perhaps hoping that we would bond. We watched a movie that he wanted to see, and during that time, Caleb and I spoke to each other a bit, which was already significant progress compared to his years of ignoring me. I remember that Karen and Caleb sometimes played video games together, but I didn't think much of it. Karen told me how one day Caleb opened up to her about his difficulties and recent breakup with a girlfriend. He was vulnerable in front of her, and they became friends. She said that he sometimes flirted innocently with her when I wasn't around, and obviously, it all went too far, and she could no longer restrain herself. I closed my eyes as my imagination conjured up images of my wife and brother sleeping together, and I almost threw up. She told me how guilty she felt afterward and ran away from him. After that, she decided to return home, which was true because my girlfriend suddenly said she wanted to go home, although I thought she would stay for New Year's with me. I tried to convince her to stay, but she insisted that she needed to leave after the holidays. When we met again at college after classes resumed, she was as cheerful as ever, and I didn't suspect anything. 2 weeks later, we found out she was pregnant. Now, Karen told me she didn't know who the real father of the child was, me or Caleb, and that there was no way to find out since I had already taken responsibility. She knew that between the two of us, I was the more reliable brother, so she decided to stay with me. That's why we got married. I felt like my world was collapsing around me. The son I loved and had spent countless hours with might not even be mine. I asked her if she was still seeing Caleb, and she slowly nodded. Karen told me that she and Caleb had always kept in touch because there was undeniable chemistry between them. They secretly went to hotels when she lied to me that she was working overtime. She confessed that half of her business trips were just romantic getaways with him. I asked her why she even married me if she actually wanted my brother. Karen replied that she didn't want to be the one who broke up a marriage, and, seeing what a good father I was to our son, she stayed with me all these years. According to her, she made a mistake and didn't know how to stop. I simply told Karen that I was glad she told me the truth and that I was going to pack my things and move out. Karen started crying and begging for forgiveness, saying I should have been yelling at her and getting angry, not calmly planning my next steps. I silently went to the closet and started packing my things in a suitcase. Karen kept repeating that if I really loved her, I would at least try to fight for her, and that mistakes happen in every marriage. When she realized I wasn't going to do anything, she changed her tactics and started talking about how divorce would affect our son, and that children should not be raised in a broken home. I reminded her that I might not even be his father, which brought her to tears, and she started yelling at me, accusing me of cruelty, and that I couldn't just walk away so easily. Despite having been with the child since his birth, it seemed my wife thought there was nothing that could make me leave her. I think this is partly my fault because I let many things slide in the past. Although I still had some feelings for her, they mostly came from the fact that I believed we had a common son and that we had been together since our college days. Karen continued to insist that it wasn't too late and that we could still fix everything, but I found it hard to believe and felt that I no longer had the strength to deal with it, even if I forgave her. I could never forget that she slept with my own brother. I always believed that people could make mistakes and be forgiven because we are all imperfect, but this crossed all boundaries. I left her crying at the doorstep and drove to a hotel. The next day, I went to my parents and told them everything about my wife's affair with Caleb and how they had been meeting behind my back for years. The shock on their faces was evident. My mother, as expected, initially tried to defend Caleb, claiming that it couldn't be true because her boy would never do anything like that to his brother. Determined to uncover the truth, I asked my parents to remain silent and let me call Caleb right in front of them. I asked them not to make a sound because I thought that this way I could catch Caleb off guard. I wanted him to think that it was just a private conversation between us so that he might lower his guard. When Caleb answered the call, I immediately confronted him with the facts about his affair with my wife. At first, he categorically denied it and refused to admit it. But when I told him that Karen had confessed everything, he started blaming her, calling her immoral. He said he wasn't to blame if women wanted him, and that he was the more attractive brother. I firmly told him that I was going to expose him to everyone. When Caleb started laughing and saying that no one would believe me because he was the golden child, I smirked at his audacity and thanked him for confirming the truth. Since our parents heard every word, Caleb fell silent and then, stuttering, began trying to justify himself and save his reputation. My mother, still in shock, demanded explanations from Caleb. He mumbled pitiful attempts to justify his actions, blaming everyone but himself, and desperately trying to shift the blame onto Karen. I watched as my mother, who once defended her favorite son, now experienced a mix of disappointment and anger. In this tense moment, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. For years, I had endured Caleb's torment. Now the truth had come out, and the roles had changed. Caleb's actions were exposed for all to see. As Caleb's words began to falter, my father, usually reserved in his emotions, couldn't hide his disappointment. He asked to pass the phone to him and sternly scolded Caleb. "Caleb," he began, his voice full of condemnation, "what you did is not just a betrayal of your brother, but a betrayal of the entire family. You slept with your brother's wife and continued to do so even after their wedding. Your actions have consequences, and they have irreversibly destroyed the trust we had in you. I raised both of you with the understanding that family, loyalty, and decency are the main values. But today, you have violated everything I tried to teach you." He paused to let Caleb feel the full weight of his words. "Your indifference to your brother's feelings, the lack of respect for his marriage, it's unacceptable. You didn't just hurt him, you spoiled our relationship with you. I feel that we, your mother and I, are guilty of what you have become, and we cannot allow you to go unpunished. From this day forward, I am withholding the funds I had set aside for your college. Now you'll have to figure out your own payments for your studies. I will also no longer finance your lifestyle. You think you're becoming a man by having affairs with married women? Well, let's see what happens when you have no one to rely on financially." I remained calm, although I initially wanted to scream at Caleb. Watching my father punish him was the best way for me to get satisfaction. I had exposed his true face, and it was clear that he had underestimated the consequences. Caleb continued to protest and justify his actions, but my father abruptly ended the conversation, cutting off his pitiful attempts. My mother approached me and hugged me. It had been a long time since we had such a moment. But in this hug, there was unspoken support and understanding. She apologized for not believing me all this time. I thought that my 14-year-old self could never have imagined this moment when I was supported and hugged. After that, my father helped me find a good lawyer to divorce Karen. She and her lawyer tried to play dirty, demanding alimony from me since I earned more than her, but her affair played into my hands. We also conducted a paternity test, and it turned out that Caleb was indeed the father of the child. I can't express in words how hard it was for me to digest this news. It was even worse than when Karen confessed to the affair. I was so angry that the child was not mine, but I decided to stay strong despite everything. Karen begged me to continue visiting the son, saying that he should not be punished for her actions, but I simply couldn't see him. He reminded me of Caleb, and I hated that. After our divorce was finalized, and I finally became free, I moved into my own bachelor apartment. It was strange to live alone since I got married very early and had never lived alone. However, since I had always been independent, I quickly adapted to living alone and, frankly, grew to love it. 2 weeks ago, my father called me to say that he was thinking of changing his will because he didn't want Caleb to inherit anything. If there's one thing to know about my father, it's that he's incredibly stubborn. Since he had decided he wanted nothing to do with Caleb, he kept his word. Caleb tried to make contact with our parents and even came to their house, begging for forgiveness, but they wouldn't even let him on the doorstep. My mother, who usually gave in to his whims, also seemed to be finally disillusioned with him. Although this probably caused her the most pain, Caleb hadn't written to me even once to apologize for what he had done, so he clearly had no regrets. He was just sad because the parents didn't want to communicate with him. My father told me that he would leave the entire inheritance to me in his will to ensure that Caleb could later not claim anything. He would leave him only $1. I was shocked because my father had worked hard all his life. Considering his assets, retirement fund, and life insurance, the amount would be almost $2 million. The only condition in the will was that if my father died before my mother, she would continue to live in their house, although the ownership of the house would pass to me. Of course, I had no objection since I wanted to take care of my mother until her last days. I don't know how, but Caleb learned about this, and since he couldn't reach our parents, he called me yesterday, trying to mend our relationship. He told me how hard it was for him to pay for college, and after Karen learned that the child was his, she started demanding child support from him. He said he had no money, and was looking for a part-time job, but couldn't find anything. He begged me to talk to the family, so that we could start with a clean slate, and he really needed my help. I started laughing and said that I had had enough, and that he should have thought about all this before he slept with my wife and fathered her child. Caleb started objecting, saying I was being unfair and that she was to blame too. I agreed and reminded him that I had divorced her, and now she was his responsibility. So he shouldn't call me and complain about her and or the child because these were the consequences of his own actions. Caleb began raising his voice, but I interrupted him and reminded him that he was no longer the family favorite, but the black sheep who had slept with his own brother's wife. At that moment, Caleb started crying and said that all the relatives were pressuring him, including our grandparents, but I was no longer concerned. I told him that we were done, and that he should never call me again because he was no longer my brother. Since then, I keep replaying that conversation in my head. Although I hate my brother, I had never heard him cry, at least not since we grew up. I won't lie, but it hurt a bit to see him so helpless. So I guess I'm here to ask if I should talk to my parents about him, and if I would be an asshole if I didn't do it. Update 1. Hello everyone. Many of you have asked why I no longer communicate with my son, Henry, and some in the comments even called me cruel. I'm sorry to say this, but I don't want to raise someone else's child. This is not a case where we're talking about a stepchild. In this case, I was made to believe he was my son, and then I learned that he was actually my brother's son. Of course, it hurt, and I cried about it for several days. But the reason I no longer want to interact with Henry is that I no longer want to see Karen in my life. If I interact with her child, she will find a way to re-enter my life, and I don't want that. You can call me cruel or selfish, but I can no longer see him, at least not for the foreseeable future. Update 2. Most of you correctly guessed that it was my mother who told Caleb to call me out of desperation to fix everything. I confronted my mom about this in front of my dad, and she couldn't hold back her tears. She said I had punished Caleb enough and that he had learned his lesson. My father firmly told her that if she thinks Caleb's act can be forgiven, then he can no longer live with her because he will never forgive Caleb for such betrayal. This threat made my mom fall silent. My father made it clear to her that if she talks to Caleb again and we find out, she will have to pack her things and leave him. As I've already said, my father is a very stubborn man. I hope Mom learned her lesson. Update 3. It's been 5 months since the last update. My relationship with my parents has improved over the past few months. My father and I now go golfing every weekend, and he behaves more like a friend than a father. My mom, although she misses Caleb, keeps her distance. The last time I heard about Caleb, he and Karen are now living together. Caleb even has a job. He works part-time as a mechanic. Apparently, they are raising Henry together, which is probably good. In conversations with my parents, I never mention Caleb, and they do the same. For everyone who asked, I'm doing well. I was promoted at work 2 months ago, so my salary has significantly increased. I'm not dating anyone yet because I feel I still need time. I started seeing a psychologist, so we'll see if that helps. Well, write in the comments what you think about this whole story. I was certainly surprised by the author's position regarding everything he endured from his wife in previous years. But in the matter of refusing to raise his son, Henry, I'm completely on his side. We can all talk for a long time about how you raised this child, and he's already yours. But how can you now refuse him? But honestly, let's say you've never faced such a situation. When you face it face to face, it's not so clear-cut. Let's see how you react to all this. I think I would have reacted exactly like the author. I wouldn't raise someone else's child. Anyway, thank you for watching this video to the end. Watch our previous videos, which will appear somewhere here. Subscribe to the channel because there will be many more such stories, and good luck to you.